So today, you're going to be forced to listen to me talk about reusable rockets. First, we're just going to give a little history on rockets in general. The first rocket ever fired was in 1957. That was the one that the Soviets used to put Sputnik, as the first satellite, up into orbit. The first landing of a rocket was in 1969. I included this, it was the moon landing. I included this so that there wasn't any confusion between what happened on the moon landing and what happened is what I'm going to be talking about. So the moon landing, what happened was a rocket, they fired up, and they had a ship orbiting the moon while a little pod landed on the moon. They got out, they walked around, they did their thing. They got back on the pod went up back to the ship came down to Earth. But re-entering Earth, it's still burned up, charred, they can't reuse that. I'm going to be talking about rockets that they fire off, can land up there, and then bring back to reuse. So the one that they used for the moon landing, not reusable, even though it did land, technically. The first reusable rocket test was in 2010. It was a miserable failure. I'll get into that later. The first successful one was in 2012. So a little bit more about why reusable rockets? The motivation behind it. Scientists have been wanting to reuse rockets since 1960. It's just, they haven't had the technology to do it throughout the past decades. It's a fairly recent thing. And also, Elon Musk, he's the founder of SpaceX, founded in 2002 in California. And it's just, his motivation is to colonize Mars. That's his end game. This is just the first step to it, the reusable rockets. So he's been really the kick in the butt that this scientific advancement needed. A little bit more on the conventional rocket. So ever since 1957, after first rocket, they haven't been reusable. It's been a one and done deal. They're extremely costly. They can cost upwards to $500 million. NASA's recent space shuttles have costed in between $4.5 million to $1.5 billion just to build and fire off, and the cost gets greatly reduced. Again, I'll get into that later. They all waste parts because obviously they're not reusable. You send the rocket up, it comes back down, it burns up in the atmosphere. Parts that don't burn up crash down on Earth, they land in the ocean, they're scattered everywhere, not reusable. So how reusable rockets work? So there's kind of they all follow this general instruction, which is there's two parts to the rocket. It'll lift off at a curved trajectory. So they go up, they go up, they go up until they hit the Kármán line. The Kármán line is just the border between our atmosphere and space. So after they hit the Kármán line, the first section will detach from the second section. The second section goes up into orbit. The first section will be piloted down remotely, and as it's coming down, some thrusters fire to slow it down until it touches down on the ground, which is an extremely hard process. If those thrusters fire a second too late, that thing will come crashing down and blow up. And it's really hard to try and land it on the landing pad. They have landing pads out in the ocean, which makes it really hard too, because you have to get it precisely down on that pad. So then the second part will go up, and it'll do its thing, which right now has mostly been for delivering payloads to space stations, just resupplying and stuff like that. And then it'll come back down, and a parachute will open up, a first set of parachutes to slow it down. As it's coming down, a second set will open up to really stop it, and then it'll hit the ground very slowly. They're trying to get their pods to hit the ground at about 1 mile per hour is what they want. They want this thing to crawl, but they've really only got it to like 11, 12 miles per hour, which still isn't bad. It's not like it's smashing down on Earth, but still not really where they want it. So some of the advantages of the reusable rockets, they're a lot cheaper than conventional rockets, obviously. They don't focus a lot on the complexity of the rockets. So reusable rockets are a lot less complex than space shuttles that NASA's making. They lower the price down to about $60 million to make. That's really cheap in comparison to the $500 million that NASA uses to build their rockets and fire them off. So to fire them off, the fueling, it still costs about $20 million. But again, still very cheap in comparison to what NASA's doing. It limits the amount of wasted materials. So, you're bringing the rocket down, you're reusing it, not all the materials are burning up in the atmosphere or landing somewhere in the ocean, getting lost. It makes return trips from other planets possible, which, like I said with the moon landing, we did do a return trip, it's just we weren't able to reuse the rocket. They want to be able to reuse the rocket after making trips. And this comes into play when you consider Elon Musk wanting to colonize Mars. Because you can't just send people up there and then, bye-bye, that's it. You're living on Mars now. Also, they want to make more frequent missions. Their main goal right now, Elon Musk, the next goal for him is he wants to build a rocket that they can fire off, do a mission with, bring it back down, and then fire it off again within 24 hours. That's their next step. They want to make 2 missions in one day with the same rocket, which they're getting really close to. It's not that far off from reality at this point. Now I'm going to be talking to you about some examples of rockets. So first we're going to talk about the Falcon 9. The Falcon 9 was the first reusable rocket. It was created by SpaceX. And Falcon 9 is actually a model, so there are multiple Falcon 9 rockets that have been used. Multiple trips. There's never a pilot in the rocket. All these rockets are remotely controlled. So not once has anyone ever actually gone up in a reusable rocket yet. So far they've only been used for delivery to space stations, resupplying space stations. The first test of the Falcon 9 was on June 4th in 2010. Like I said, that was a horrible failure. They didn't get the thrusters to fire at the right time, and it crashed. The first successful one was in 2012. This thing runs on a Merlin 1D engine. What that is an engine that runs off of kerosene. So most of these run off of liquid, or all of these run off of liquid fuel. So this kerosene engine produces a lot of carbon dioxide, and it has to because it has to generate a lot of thrust to get the rocket up into the atmosphere. So this thing generates 1.5 million pounds of thrust. There are multiple engines in it too. So like the first section, so like right about here I believe is where it would split off. So the first section has like 9 of these engines in it, and the second section has 1. Just to get it up into space. This thing costs $62 million to build, and then you have the additional costs for fueling. But it's pretty cheap. So the New Shepard, this one was built by Blue Origin. Blue Origin was a company founded by Jeff Bezos. He's the founder of Amazon. This thing was built for commercial use. So they want to start sending people up into space almost like it's an amusement park ride. Right now though, like I said, they're not really sending people up in these things. This one is also being used to deliver supplies. The first launch was on April 19th in 2015. It has launched 11 times since. I have a video that will show the 4th launch that it made. This thing's engine is a BE3 engine. That's an engine that runs off of hydrogen. It generates about 110,000 pounds of thrust, and the BE-3 isn't even the strongest engine that they have. They've since created one called the BE-4 engine. That thing generates over 550,000 pounds of thrust. So this thing can reach, that engine is really powerful. This thing reaches orbit in about 9 minutes. It reaches up speeds up to Mach 3. So just for reference, for anyone that doesn't know, a Mach is the speed of sound, which is about 767 miles per hour. This thing reaches 2,300 miles per hour. And you experience forces in this 3 times that of Earth. And I like to emphasize that because they want to put you in this and send you up. The pod up here, so it's split into the first section, the second section. You'll get a better visual. This second section, the pod, it holds about 6 people, roughly. So about maybe 3 or 4 experienced astronauts taking 2 people up is what they want. You can buy your tickets on their website on neworigin.com, or blueorigin.com, sorry. This is just a little diagram of how it works, how I explained it. So you have the first rocket over there, it launches at its curved trajectory, goes up, goes up, goes up, Kármán line, splits, the second half, it'll come back down, the thrusters will fire, come down, and it has legs that open up and sets itself down on a launching pad, almost like something you see out of a movie. Then you have the capsule, which goes up past the Kármán line into orbit. It will come back down. Then right about here, the first set of parachutes will open up, comes down, second set opens up, and then it gently lands itself on the ground. I have a video prepared so you can actually see this in action.
Altimeter on the bottom left corner of your screen, approaching max Q, maximum dynamic pressure on the rocket. Max Q confirmed. She continues to punch her way to space. A beautiful burn on that BE-3 engine. All right, main engine cutoff is confirmed. While the speed is declining, you'll notice, of course, that the rocket and the capsule are continuing its ascent to space. We're coming up shortly on separation. That is when the capsule is going to separate from the booster. There it is. Separation is confirmed. At this point, if you were an astronaut on board, this is when you're going to start to feel that weightlessness. We're going to let you unbuckle. I know I'd be doing my somersaults in there before taking in those spectacular views out of the world's largest windows that have ever been to space. We have crossed the 350,000 foot mark, which is what we were aiming for. Wow, almost right on the nose. 350,775 feet, 1,000 feet, that is absolutely incredible. That is exactly what we were targeting. Now, of course, this is the unofficial altitude of our apogee. We will be confirming all of these statistics after the flight. Next here, we're looking for the drag brakes to deploy. There we go, drag brakes deployed. That is cutting the speed. New Shepard right over my shoulder. She is coming in. There we go. We're just keeping nicely. Absolutely spectacular. And touchdown. Welcome home, New Shepard. Wow, absolutely spectacular flight. That is the 4th mission to space and back for that rocket. That, everybody, is a reusable rocket. There go the drogues. Those are the guide parachutes. We're now waiting for the mains. A little bit of coning. That's all right. Those mains should take care of that. Reefing of the parachutes. Now waiting for full inflation. There we go. And touchdown. Welcome home, New Shepard. Incredible day. Kudos to the whole team. Kudos to our customers.
So that's what it looks like whenever it fires off and comes back down. At least the Blue Shepard, the New Shepard. Now we get into my favorite one. This one is the Falcon Heavy. This is the most recent one that they built. It first fired off in February of last year. This is currently the most powerful rocket in the world. It is the equivalent of 3 Falcon 9s, just pretty much strapped together. This is the car that you saw Elon Musk strap his car to and fire it off into space, because the whole pull behind this rocket is the fact that it can carry up to 63 tons of cargo. Just for reference, NASA's last space shuttle could only carry 24 tons. This thing almost triples what NASA's doing. So this thing uses a bunch of engines called the Raptor engine. The Raptor engine is also very new. It was first tested in 2016. It runs off of methane, and this thing has like 5 Raptor engines strapped in it. The most powerful engine in the world. It's, I don't know, I really like it. Especially since it costs only $90 million to build. This is honestly a marvel. Alright, so now I'm going to get into some of the disadvantages, which kind of falls under the controversy. So, the whole thing behind this is that we have reusable rockets, and they want to be able to do multiple missions, you know, more frequent missions over time. The problem with that is that these things run off of fuels that produce a lot of carbon dioxide. And there's a lot of fuel that goes into these things because they need a lot of power to be able to, you know, get themselves out into space. So they produce a lot of carbon dioxide at a lot higher elevation than planes. So people argue that planes also produce a lot of carbon dioxide, and we have tons of flights going back and forth between, you know, different cities and countries every day. Well, the problem is that these things generate a lot more carbon dioxide on top of the carbon dioxide that's already being generated by planes, and at much higher elevation. So now this soot and this pollution is being spread more frequently and in a vaster range. There's also some of the parts, when reusable rockets come back down, they need refurbished. So you're not going to have a perfectly new reusable rocket every single time your rocket comes down and lands. And in some cases, it can cost a lot more to refurbish a part than to actually build a new one. and then they have to go through extensive tests on this refurbished part to make sure that it's safe to be reused. It's it can be very dangerous, especially when you're testing the part that you know, refurbished, and you strap it back on, and then you send it off, and it doesn't work the way you thought it would, or like an engine gives out. It can be very dangerous. And now a little more on where this is leading. So more advanced is the self-landing rockets that they have now. So not only are they reusable, but SpaceX has been building them to land themselves. They programmed this computer to be able to do thousands of calculations in seconds, and it has to be very accurate, and it is. This is the rocket that it's the latest Falcon 9 model that they had the computer in, that this thing fired itself off, did its mission by itself, landed, and everyone just watched it. They have this thing programmed so that it can accommodate for the weather for its landing. It's kind of scary when you think about it, because no humans were involved in this launch at all. This was completely robotic, and I'm not going to get too further into that because then that borders AI, and I'm not doing AI. So then there's why I chose this topic. So I'm a really large fan of science fiction, and this is something right out of a book. A rocket being fired off, and then coming back down, landing itself, being able to be reused. I've been wanting to look deeper into this for a while because there were news reports all over the place, especially when SpaceX first fired off their reusable rockets, and then they had the rocket land themselves. And I've just been too lazy. I've just been procrastinating it, and so this project was kind of the thing that I needed. Also, this wasn't a personal attack, but all my other ideas were shot down. So I gave one idea, it didn't work, so I just started going down the list, and reusable rockets was the one that worked. So here I am. And then before and after. So beforehand, I have the cliche, oh, it was interesting, oh, it was exciting, which, I genuinely do think it was interesting and exciting, but that seems to be what everyone says about their advancement. Also, I didn't really take it seriously. I'll tell you why I didn't take it seriously. Because of the memes. Because I'm an avid internet user, and when Elon Musk fired his car into space, that wasn't really something that everyone took too seriously. Afterwards, I definitely take it more seriously, and I actually am more excited about it, and especially now that I have a better understanding about it. I mean, I still like the memes. And those are my references. And that's my presentation.